NHL by the Era, Original 6. In this episode of NHL by the Era, I'll be talking about the Original 6 era, arguably the golden years of hockey, and when the game reached new heights. The Original 6 teams that played in the NHL from 1942 to 1967 were the Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings, Montreal Canadiens, New York Rangers, and Toronto Maple Leafs. In February 1943, after league president Frank Calder died, Greg Dutton took over as president after receiving assurances from the league that the Brooklyn franchise he had operated would resume play after World War II. In 1946, Clarence Campbell replaced Dutton as the league's new president and would serve as the league's president until his retirement in 1977. For the first 21 years of his presidency, the same 6 teams competed for the Stanley Cup in a period that has been called by many as the golden age of hockey. The Original 6 era was best known for its dynasties. Every cup in the Original 6 era was won by either the Montreal Canadiens, Detroit Red Wings, or Toronto Maple Leafs, with the exception of the 1961 Stanley Cup, which was won by Chicago. The Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup 5 times between 1944-45 and 1950-51. The Maple Leafs also finished the era by winning the Stanley Cup 4 times between 1962 and 1967, the 1967 championship being the last one to date. Beginning in 1948-49, the Detroit Red Wings won 7 consecutive regular season titles, a feat no other team has accomplished, and winning the Stanley Cup 4 times during that time. Between 1954 and 1956, the Detroit Red Wings and Montreal Canadiens faced each other in the Stanley Cup Finals in 3 consecutive seasons. Detroit won in 1954 and 55, but in 1956, Montreal would prevail and put an end to the Red Wings dynasty, thus starting their own. The Montreal Canadiens won 5 consecutive championships between 1956 and 1960, a feat no other team has duplicated. No team in the Original 6 era was as dominant as the Montreal Canadiens, who won a total of 10 Stanley Cups during the era. Television had its doubters, especially in Campbell, but in 1952, CBC began televising games after convincing from Toronto owner Conn Smythe. On November 1st, 1952, Hockey Night in Canada was first broadcasted on television, with Foster Hewitt calling the action between the Leafs and Bruins at Maple Leafs Garden. Hockey Night in Canada quickly became the highest rated show on Canadian television. Although the Original 6 was said to be the golden era of hockey, there was a lot of corruption behind the scenes. The league tolerated monopolistic practices by the owners. At one point, for instance, Red Wings owner James E. Norris effectively owned the Blackhawks as well and was the largest stockholder in the Rangers. Labor conditions for the players were poor, and players' medical bills were paid only 2 months after an injury. The first players' union was formed February 12, 1957, led by Red Wings star player Ted Lindsay, who sat on the board of the NHL Pension Society since 1952. Lindsay and his fellow players were upset by the league's refusal to let them view the books related to the pension fund. Led by Alan Eagleson, the National Hockey Players Association was formed in 1967. There were many noteworthy superstars during the Original 6 era, including Gordie Howe, Maurice Richard, John Beliveau, Doug Harvey, and a host of other all-time greats. The 1940s Canadiens were led by the punchline of Elmer Lyke, Toe Blake, and Maurice Richard, a trio of Hall of Famers who are all members of the NHL's greatest 100-player list. In 1944-45, Lyke, Richard, and Blake finished first, second, and third in the NHL in scoring with 80, 73, and 67 points respectively. Maurice Richard was the first truly elite scorer in the NHL and became the first player to net 50 goals in a 50-game season, a feat no other player had accomplished. Besides being one of the league's premier scorers, Richard was no stranger to controversy, the most infamous of which was the Richard Riot. Richard became the first player to score 500 career goals and was also an 8-time Stanley Cup champion. During the entirety of the Original 6 era, the Red Wings were built around Gordie Howe, also known as Mr. Hockey, and arguably the greatest hockey player of all time. He was one of the league's first major superstars and would play for Detroit from 1946 to 1972, almost having a 3-decade-long reign of dominance. Howe won the Art Ross Trophy for leading the league in points each year from 1950-51 to 1953-54, then again in 1956-57 and 1962-63, for a total of 6 times, which is second most in NHL history. Mr. Hockey also led the NHL in goal scoring 4 times, won the Stanley Cup 4 times, and won the Hart Trophy as league MVP 6 times. John Beliveau is one of the winningest players in NHL history, with 10 Stanley Cups as a player, and is widely regarded as one of the 10 greatest players of all time. Beliveau won 2 Hart trophies in 1956 and 1964, one Art Ross trophy in 1956, and a Conn Smythe trophy in 1956. He served as captain of the Montreal Canadiens for 10 seasons and was the 4th player to score 500 goals and the 2nd to score 1,000 points. Doug Harvey was the best defenseman in the league during the original Six era and played a key role in making the Canadiens a dynasty. Harvey helped the Canadiens to reach the Stanley Cup Finals 11 times, winning the Stanley Cup 6 times during his career. He had a stranglehold on the Norris Trophy, which is awarded to the league's top defenseman, winning the award 7 times during the era. Although the original Six era allowed the NHL to have their golden years, the following years were full of mergers and expansions, which hurt the NHL product for a while.